The first thing I noticed was the empty space. For 12 years, our caravan had stood beside the bungalow, close enough to the kitchen window that Margaret could check it whenever the wind grew strong. Now there was only a pale rectangle on the gravel, bordered by darker stones where the rain had never reached. I stood there, holding a printed bank statement. On one payment had been circled in blue ink. $16,800. The money from the sale of the Skylark. The caravan had belonged to Margaret and me. I sold it because Helen said we were going to begin a new life together. 3 days later, every message disappeared. That morning, I had woken before the alarm. My suitcase was packed by the front door, and 2 train tickets to York lay neatly on the kitchen table. In my coat pocket was a small silver pendant I had bought for Helen. Nothing extravagant. A little silver swallow, because she once told me swallows always found their way home. At 6:40, I sent her a message. Morning, love. Today's the day. 1. Gray tick appeared. I made tea and tried not to keep checking the screen. At 7:15, her profile photograph vanished. At 8 o'clock, I rang her number. A recorded voice told me it was no longer in service. I told myself there had been a technical problem. Perhaps her phone had been stolen. Perhaps she was already traveling and had lost signal. There was always an explanation with Helen, me. Then I checked the cottage address she had sent me. She said she had rented it for us so we could spend a few quiet days together before deciding what came next. I drove north. The journey took nearly 3 hours. I rehearsed what I would say when I saw her. I even imagined laughing about the panic once she explained everything. But the postcode did not lead to a cottage. It led to an empty field outside Ripon. I sat behind the wheel staring at the navigation screen while rain gathered on the windscreen and sheep moved along the far hedge. I waited for her to call. She never did. Then my bank rang. A fraud officer asked whether I had authorized several transfers to accounts overseas. I said yes. There was a pause. Then he asked, very carefully, "Sir, have you ever met the person receiving this money?" I looked towards the field and thought of the empty driveway waiting for me at home. That was the first moment I understood. I had not lost a future. I had paid someone to invent one. But why had a man who checked every railway signal twice trusted a woman he had never met with the last piece of his life with Margaret? 8 months earlier, my life was still arranged around habits Margaret and I had built over 42 years. I woke at 6:30, even though I had been retired for 4 years. Railway work had trained my body too well. By 7, the kettle was on, and the brown teapot was warming beside the sink. Most mornings, I still placed 2 mugs on the worktop. Then, I would notice, 1 for me, 1 for no one. I never spoke about that sort of thing. Claire rang twice a week from Birmingham and always asked the same question. "You keeping busy, Dad? Plenty to do." It was not exactly a lie. I walked to the village shop for the newspaper. I trimmed hedges that did not need trimming. I tightened cupboard hinges, polished tools, and checked the boiler pressure twice. If Graham Ellis was in his garden next door, we spoke over the fence. "How are you getting on, Pete?" "Can't complain." People say that when they do not want the truth examined too closely. The bungalow was clean, warm, and almost unchanged. Margaret's coat still hung behind the front door. Her gardening gloves remained on the shelf in the shed. I had not replaced the bedroom curtains because she had chosen them after 3 separate trips into Shrewsbury. Beside the house, under a green cover, stood the Skylark, our 2-berth caravan. Every few weeks, I uncovered it, checked the tires, and ran water through the taps. I cleaned the windows and tested the lights. Though I had not taken it anywhere since Margaret died, I could not bring myself to tow it away alone. That caravan held more of our marriage than some rooms in the house. We had taken it to Tenby, Barmouth, Llandudno, and the lakes. Margaret made bacon sandwiches on a tiny hob, while I pretended I knew where we were going. She kept maps folded in impossible ways and blamed me whenever we missed a turning. Inside one cupboard was her notebook, places still to see. After the funeral, I found it beneath a stack of campsite leaflets. The final entry was unfinished. Northumberland coast, next spring. There had been no next spring for us. Claire often invited me to Birmingham for Sunday lunch. Sometimes I went. Max. Sometimes I said the traffic would be dreadful or that I had jobs to finish. I did not tell her that certain days passed with no human voice, except the self-checkout machine at Tesco. One afternoon, I stopped at a garden center cafe. At the table beside me, a couple about my age shared a slice of cake and discussed a holiday in Devon. I felt jealous. Not of the holiday, of having someone to ask whether you wanted the last piece. That evening, Claire suggested a walking group, or one of those friendship websites for people over 60. I managed 42 years without the internet arranging my life. She laughed, but I could hear the worry beneath it. Weeks passed. Then came my wedding anniversary. I spent it alone, sitting inside the skylark while rain tapped against the roof. When I opened Margaret's notebook, a photograph slipped onto the floor. She was standing beside the Caravan in Cornwall, laughing into the wind. On the back, in her handwriting, were the words, "Don't stop living before your life is over." That sentence stayed with me all evening. Near midnight, I opened my laptop and created a profile on a companionship website. I wrote that I was widowed, retired, interested in gardening, travel, and quiet conversation. For several days, no one replied. Then a message appeared from a woman named Helen Archer. "Is that an Abbey Caravan behind you? My husband and I had one just like it before he died." How could a stranger have chosen the one memory I was least able to defend? I did not answer Helen straight away. Her message seemed harmless enough, but I had spent most of my working life checking things before trusting them. Signals, wiring diagrams, maintenance reports. Small errors could become serious if you ignored them. So I looked through her profile first. Helen Archer, 62. Widowed, former physiotherapy assistant. Living in Harrogate. One grown son in Australia. Her photographs were ordinary. In one, she stood beside a rose garden, wearing a navy cardigan. In another, she was holding a paper cup near Whitby Harbor. She looked pleasant, but not polished, like someone you might pass in a garden center without noticing twice. Eventually I replied, "Yes, it is an Abbey. Margaret and I had it for years." Helen answered a few minutes later, "My husband, Michael, loved ours. He could reverse it into any pitch except the one we had actually booked." I smiled. Margaret used to say something similar about me. For the first week, our messages were brief. Helen asked about the skylark before she asked much about me. She told me Michael had died after a short illness, and that the quiet afterwards had been harder than the funeral. One evening, she wrote, "People think grief is crying. Sometimes it is simply having no one to tell that the kettle has broken." I read that sentence twice. It was such an ordinary sort of loneliness that I believed it immediately. After that, we spoke most evenings. Helen remembered things. She knew Margaret had preferred the Welsh coast. She asked whether my runner beans had survived the cold nights. She remembered Claire lived in Birmingham, and that I took my tea without sugar. She told me about her own life in small pieces. Her son, Oliver, had moved to Perth after marrying an Australian woman. She volunteered at a charity shop twice a week. She lived in a rented flat and did not know many people nearby. Nothing sounded too convenient, it simply sounded familiar. Soon, messages became telephone calls. Helen's voice was soft, educated, and slightly northern. She laughed at my dry jokes, even the poor ones. She never sounded young or glamorous. She sounded like someone who had spent years listening to other people. By 8:30 each evening, I found myself waiting for the phone. I began cooking proper meals, because she always asked what I had eaten. I bought 2 new shirts in Shrewsbury and felt ridiculous when Graham noticed. "You're looking smart lately, Pete." Made a friend online. A lady friend? Don't get carried away. But I was already carrying myself somewhere new. Helen sent photographs from cafes, gardens, and coastal paths. In one, she wore a raincoat beside a spaniel she said belonged to a neighbor. Nothing appeared expensive or staged. I searched her name online and found very little. When I mentioned it, she said, she had removed most of her accounts after receiving unpleasant messages following Michael's death. I felt protective of her. After 3 weeks, we arranged to meet in Chester. The day before, Helen rang in tears. Her sister had fallen and been taken to hospital. She sent a photograph of a corridor with plastic chairs and harsh lights. I believed her. 2 days later, she called again. I was frightened you'd think I'd invented it. Of course I don't. You matter to me more than I expected, Peter. I sat quietly before answering. You matter to me too. That evening, I took Margaret's coat from behind the front door, placed it carefully in the wardrobe. Was I finally allowing myself to live again? Or had Helen just discovered how easily an emergency could make me forgive disappointment? For the next, Helen became part of the shape of my day. Her first message usually arrived before 7. "Morning, Peter. How did you sleep?" Sometimes I had not slept well at all, but knowing someone would ask made the night feel less empty. She called most evenings. If I had a blood pressure appointment, she remembered it. If I mentioned rain getting into the shed, she asked the following day whether I had found the leak. On Margaret's birthday, I sat inside. The skylark with the door closed and the heater humming beside me. Helen stayed on the telephone. She did not tell me to be grateful for the years Margaret and I had shared. She did not say I should move forward. She simply listened. Then she said, "Loving someone new does not erase the person who came before." I rested my hand on Margaret's travel notebook. Until that moment, I had thought happiness would be a form of disloyalty. Helen made it sound possible to carry grief and hope at the same time. I began telling Claire more about her. "She sounds lovely," Claire said. "When are you meeting?" "We tried Chester." "I know." "When is the next one?" "Soon. Her sister still needs help." Claire did not argue, but I heard caution in her silence. Helen began speaking about our future carefully, almost as a joke. She said, "We should finish Margaret's Northumberland journey, Max." She had always wanted to see Bamberg Castle, and she imagined us waking early in the skylark with the sea somewhere beyond the dunes. I sent her photographs of the caravan's interior. "It doesn't feel old," she said. "It feels like a little home waiting for someone." That sentence pleased me more than it should have. I replaced the faded curtains, fitted a new leisure battery, and ordered 2 matching travel mugs. Graham watched me carrying boxes from the car. "Getting ready for a trip? Possibly. With your online lady?" "Her name is Smiled. When do we meet her?" I busied myself with the battery connections. Helen seemed to understand why people might worry. One evening, she sent a photograph of what appeared to be her passport page, partly covered. "I want you to know I'm real," she said. She also sent a letter addressed to Mrs. Helen Archer at a Harrogate flat. I offered to send my driving license in return. "No," she said firmly. "Never send personal documents online." Her warning made her seem sensible. We arranged another meeting, this time in York. The night before, Helen rang to say her bank card had been frozen after a suspicious payment. She insisted she could still travel. By morning, her sister had been taken back into hospital. The meeting was canceled again. I was hurt, and Helen heard it. "I'm terrified you'll decide I'm too complicated," she said through tears. I spent the call reassuring her. Then she disappeared for 2 days. No messages, no calls. By the second evening, I had convinced myself I had lost her. When she finally returned, she said she had needed time because her feelings had become serious. "I love you, Peter." The room went very still. "I love you too," I said. I wrote the date in Margaret's notebook, then felt ashamed and tore the page out soon afterwards. Helen told me about an inheritance from Michael. A family property in Cyprus had been sold, and nearly £240,000 was being transferred to Britain. She made it clear she did not need my money. Instead, she spoke about buying a modest stone cottage outside Thirsk, with a garden, a conservatory and room beside it for the Skylark. She sent photographs. "Imagine waking there," she said, "and deciding where we travel next." For the first time, retirement felt larger than the bungalow and the village shop. Then, during one quiet call, Helen asked what I thought the Skylark might be worth. Why would a woman expecting nearly £250,000 care about the exact value of my caravan? Nax. The warning signs did not arrive like alarms. They appeared quietly, one at a time, each small enough to explain away. Helen still avoided video calls. At first, she said the camera on her tablet had stopped working. Later, she admitted she hated seeing herself on screen after being ill. I understood that. I had never liked cameras either. Then I noticed little differences in her stories. Once, she told me Michael had died 5 years earlier. A few weeks later, she said it had been nearly 7. When I asked, she paused. "I count from when he first became ill," she said. "Sometimes the years blur together." It sounded reasonable. She had told me she worked at Harrogate District Hospital, but during another conversation she mentioned traveling daily to Leeds. "I worked at several clinics," she explained. "You know how health contracts are." Again, possible. Her accent sometimes seemed stronger. Once, it almost disappeared. During one evening call, I heard several voices behind her. They were not the soft sounds of a television. People appeared to be talking close by. "Where are you?" I asked. "At my sister's. She's left the television on." A man's voice suddenly said something sharp. The line disconnected. Helen rang back 10 minutes later and said a neighbor had been arguing in the corridor. Every explanation made sense on its own. That was the difficulty. Claire was less willing to ignore them. "What's her full address?" she asked during one of our calls. "She values her privacy." "You're planning a life with her, Dad." "That doesn't mean I hand out her details." Claire searched the photographs but found nothing immediately. She told me 2 canceled meetings and no video calls were serious warning signs. "You told me not to spend the rest of my life alone," I said. "I want you happy, I don't want you hurried." I ended the call sooner than usual. That evening, Helen noticed something was wrong. I admitted Claire was suspicious. Helen did not criticize her. "Your daughter loves you," she said. "She may be frightened someone will take her mother's place." The thought stayed with me. Then Helen offered to sign an agreement protecting my bungalow and savings if we ever lived together. "I don't want your money, Peter. I only want you." A week later, a parcel arrived. Inside was a knitted blue scarf and a handwritten card. "For the Northumberland wind, all my love, Helen." I held the scarf against my face. It smelled faintly of lavender. It was real. Something she had touched had reached my house. When Claire and Daniel visited, Daniel examined the parcel label. He said the postcode belonged to a mail forwarding business in Manchester, not Harrogate. She may have posted it while visiting family. He asked to see Helen's photographs. One had been cropped tightly around her face. "I can run a better reverse image search," he said. "No." The answer came more sharply than I intended. Claire looked at me carefully. "We're only trying to help. You're treating her like a criminal." After they left, Helen sent a voice message. She sounded frightened. The inheritance from Cyprus had been held because of unpaid legal and transfer fees. She said she would handle it herself. Then her voice softened. I only wish there were someone I could trust enough to help me think clearly." She had not asked me for money, though. Why did I immediately begin wondering how much I could give her? I asked Helen how much the legal fee was. At first, she refused to tell me. It's my problem, she said. I shouldn't involve you. Helen, how much? There was a long silence. £2,750. The figure was not impossible, but it was large enough to make me sit back in my chair. She explained that most of her savings were locked in a fixed account for another 6 weeks. The solicitor, handling the Cyprus property, needed payment within 48 hours. Without it, she could lose the cottage deposit and face further charges. I'll manage somehow, she said. Please forget I mentioned it. I offered to lend her the money. She refused. I offered again the next morning. No, Peter, I don't want money coming between us. Her reluctance reassured me more than any document could have done. On the third offer, she accepted. A letter arrived by email from an international legal firm. It had a proper-looking logo, reference numbers, and several paragraphs of language I barely understood. The payment details were for a British bank account in another person's name. Helen explained that it belonged to the firm's payment processor. I hesitated for perhaps 5 minutes. Then I transferred $2,750. That evening, Helen sounded happier than I had heard her in weeks. You've shown me what partnership feels like, she said. She described cooking Sunday lunch in our new cottage. Roast chicken, proper gravy, and too many potatoes because she never knew how many to make. I went to bed feeling proud. 2 weeks later, another difficulty appeared. Customs and tax officials supposedly required a security bond of £6,400 before the inheritance could enter Britain. Helen said she would sell her jewelry. She sent photographs of a wedding ring and a gold bracelet. Don't sell those, I said. They belong to your old life. In the end, I transferred another £4,000. Helen claimed her sister would provide the rest. The repayment date came and passed. There were compliance checks, she said. Then banking delays. She sent screenshots showing £240, now zone, pending in an overseas account. I could not verify them, but I wanted them to be true. Then the cottage returned to our conversations. The owner would hold it for 10 more days if Helen could show proof of funds. My savings were already low. That was when she mentioned the Skylark. We could always buy a newer Caravan later, she said. I felt as though she had touched something private. That Caravan was Margaret's. Helen apologized immediately. You're right, I should never have suggested it. For several days, she said nothing about money. Then she rang late one evening, crying. The cottage owner had accepted another offer. Our future was disappearing because she could not access money that already belonged to her. After the call, I sat alone inside the Skylark and opened Margaret's travel notebook. Northumberland coast next spring. I read the unfinished line until the words blurred. Next. Margaret would not have wanted me preserving a vehicle while turning away from the chance to live again. At least, that was what I told myself. Next. The next morning, I contacted a caravan dealer near Telford. He offered £18,500. Graham saw the valuation papers on my kitchen table. You're not selling it, are you? Helen and I are buying a home. He looked at me for a long moment. I could not answer. Helen said the final amount needed was £16,800. Once it was paid, the inheritance would be released, and we would meet within 3 days. I watched the Skylark being towed away from the bungalow. Margaret's notebook stood in the front window until the Caravan disappeared around the corner. Then I went inside and transferred £16,800. When the empty driveway fell silent, had I purchased a new beginning? Or surrendered the final proof that my old life had been real? Next. Claire found out about the Caravan because Graham rang her. I was in the kitchen when her car pulled onto the drive that evening. Daniel was beside her. Before either of them knocked, I already knew why they had come. You had no right involving my daughter. But at the time I opened the door and let them in. Claire did not remove her coat. Dad, where's the Skylark? I sold it. Her face changed. For how much? That is my business. Did you give the money to Helen? Daniel looked down. Claire took a slow breath. How much have you sent altogether? I wanted to say it did not matter because the inheritance would clear in 3 days. I wanted to tell them they would soon feel ashamed for doubting her. Instead, I said, a little over 23,000. Claire gripped the back of a chair. Dad, call the bank. No, please. She is meeting me in 3 days. If I interfere now, I could ruin everything. Daniel quietly opened the documents Helen had sent. This registration number is wrong, he said. He turned the laptop towards me. The legal company's website had been created only 5 months earlier. Its London office was a virtual address. Then, he found the solicitor named on Helen's letter. She was real, but she worked for another firm. On her company website was a warning that fraudsters were using her name. My mouth went dry. Daniel searched Helen's photographs again. This time, several appeared on the public account of a retired teacher in Dorset called Susan Bell, the same smile, the same raincoat, the same rose garden. Susan had posted a warning saying her pictures were being used on false dating profiles. That isn't Helen, Claire said softly. You don't know that. Dad, look at it. A photograph can be stolen. Her voice cannot. Claire asked me to request a live video call. I sent the message while they waited. For 3 hours, Helen did not reply. Then her answer came. I cannot believe you allowed your family to humiliate me. She said she would repay every penny and end the relationship. Panic rose through me. I apologized before Claire could stop me. Please don't send anything else, she said. I won't. I meant it when I said it. Late that night, Helen called privately. Her voice was cold beneath the tears. The legal firm had imposed one final anti-fraud verification charge of £1,900. She claimed Claire and Daniel's online inquiries had triggered it. If it isn't paid, she said, the inheritance could be frozen for years. I have nothing left. You still have the car. For the first time, I did not answer immediately. Then her tone changed. After everything I trusted you with, you're abandoning me over less than £2,000. There was something in her voice I had never heard before. Not sadness, contempt. I did not send the money. The next morning, Claire took me to the bank. A fraud specialist confirmed that the receiving accounts were linked to suspicious transactions. The bank attempted an urgent recall, but most of the money had already moved. West Mercia police were contacted. I gave a statement. Yet I still checked my phone every few minutes. The night before our promise meeting, Helen sent one final message. I knew your family would ruin this. Goodbye, Peter. Then she blocked me. The following morning, I dressed anyway. I put the 2 train tickets in my coat pocket and sat at Shrewsbury Station for more than an hour. Even after seeing the proof, why did part of me still believe Helen might step off the next train and explain everything? Sergeant Louise Mercer came to the bungalow 2 days later. She was direct but never unkind. She sat at my kitchen table with the printed messages arranged between us and asked me to begin from the first contact. When I finished, she said, Peter, Helen Archer was probably not one person. I looked at her. She explained that the messages, documents, telephone calls, and emergencies may have been managed by several people. One person could write the affectionate messages. Another could make the calls. Someone else could prepare the legal letters and move the money. The voice may have belonged to a woman handling several victims at once, she said. I thought of the blue scarf and handwritten card. Louise explained that parcels were often sent through mail forwarding addresses because physical objects made the relationship feel real. Then, she showed me something Daniel had found years earlier. Claire, had posted a public photograph of me beside the Skylark on the anniversary of Margaret's death. The caption mentioned my railway career, our caravan holidays, and how difficult the year had been. The scammers had not guessed what mattered to me. They had collected it. Max. I stared at the photograph until I could no longer recognize the man standing there. Louise said the manipulation usually followed a pattern: affection first, then dependency, meetings canceled by believable emergencies, concerned relatives described as jealous or controlling, silence used as punishment, urgent payments introduced only after trust had become fear. They did not steal from you because you were careless, she said. They studied what mattered to you and used it as a key. I asked the question I had been avoiding. Did she ever care? Louise paused. The person you cared for may not have existed, but the care you felt was real. The police traced one payment to the account of a young man in Wolverhampton. Louise believed he had been recruited as a money mule. Another transfer had been converted into cryptocurrency almost immediately. The final £16,800 had been divided across several accounts within hours. Max. Recovery was uncertain. Daniel continued examining the voice messages. He noticed faint background sounds that appeared more than once. In one recording, there was a railway announcement. The same announcement appeared in messages sent to another victim who had posted about her experience online. Please connect my case to 7 others across Britain. A widow in Kent, a retired nurse in Cardiff, a divorced man in Nottingham. Together, they had lost more than £300,000. Helen Archer had also called herself Linda, Anne, Patricia, and Carol. The stories were nearly identical. A dead husband, a child overseas, a delayed inheritance, a cottage waiting for a shared future. Louise played me a recording from another victim. The same woman's voice said, "Loving someone new does not erase the person who came before." I stopped breathing for a moment. That sentence had released me from my guilt over Margaret. It had not been spoken for me. It had been read from a script. I removed the blue scarf and handed it to Louise. She placed it carefully into an evidence bag. Then she showed me a CCTV image taken at a cash machine in Manchester. A woman in her late 50s was withdrawing money from one of the receiving accounts. She was not the woman in the photographs. Her name was Diane Rook. Police believed she may have provided Helen's voice and worked with a larger fraud network. Louise played part of my final call, again. This time, beneath the tears and panic, I heard the clipped impatience I had noticed. Just when I refused the last payment, there had been no cottage, no inheritance, no meeting in York. Even the empty field outside Ripon had been chosen to waste my time while the money moved. I sold Margaret's caravan, I said. Claire reached across the table. Mum wasn't in the caravan, Dad. She was in the life you had together. No thief can sell that, Max. That was when I finally broke down. I admitted I had known something was wrong before the last transfer. I sent it anyway, because losing Helen frightened me more than losing the money. But could I help bring these people to justice without publicly admitting the loneliness I had tried so hard to hide? Max. I agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. Louise warned me that the next stage might be difficult. The police wanted to know whether the people behind Helen would respond, if they believed I still had access to money. They created a new telephone number and monitored email account. Every message would be reviewed before it was sent. I wrote to an address Helen had used months earlier. I have received a pension payment. I still want to understand what happened between us. For nearly a day, nothing came back. Then a reply appeared. Peter, I have been terribly ill. I never stopped loving you. The words were familiar enough to make my chest tighten, even though I knew what they were. The writer claimed Helen needed £3,500 for emergency travel expenses, so she could return to Britain and explain everything in person. Louise watched me read it. They know exactly which hope to reopen, she said. A controlled transfer was arranged. The money went into a British account, then moved almost immediately. Investigators followed the activity to another account, and eventually to a rented flat in Manchester. Several weeks later, police executed search warrants. They recovered mobile phones, forged legal letters, prepaid bank cards, and sheets of handwritten notes about victims. Louise visited me with a photograph of one notebook page. My name was written near the top. Beside it were the widower. Caravan. Daughter suspicious. Responds to silence. Use wife memory. For a while I could not speak. Margaret's death had been reduced to a sales technique. The caravan, Claire, my fear of being left. Each part of my life had been listed as something to exploit. Deanne Rook and 2 associates were arrested. Evidence linked them to dozens of false identities and victims across Britain. Months later, they were charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. It was not perfect justice. The police believed some organizers were operating abroad. Most of my money had already disappeared through accounts that could not be recovered. But £200 was returned from one account, frozen during the investigation. Then Graham arrived at my door with unexpected news. The dealer near Telford had heard about the case. The Skylark had not yet been sold. The dealer offered to let me buy it back using the recovered money. He said he would absorb part of the difference himself. I did not know what to say. For several days, I imagined the caravan returning to the drive. Sometimes the thought comforted me. Sometimes it filled me with shame. Claire said, "You don't have to buy it back for Mom. And you don't have to leave it there because of Helen." So I went to the dealership alone. The Skylark stood at the far end of the yard, clean and quiet beneath a gray sky. I opened the door. The familiar smell of upholstery and wood polish met me. Margaret's travel notebook was gone. I had removed it before the police interview, and forgotten that I had done so. But beneath the passenger seat, something pale caught the light. I reached down and found one of Margaret's old enamel mugs, chipped slightly along the rim. The dealer must have missed it when the caravan was cleaned. I held it in both hands and sat at the little table where Margaret and I had once planned journeys we never took. Would bringing the Skylark home help me reclaim my life? Or keep me trapped between the wife I lost and the woman who never existed? I bought the Skylark back. Not because I believed returning it to the driveway would undo what had happened. Nothing could do that. But when I stood inside the caravan, holding Margaret's chipped enamel mug, I realized leaving it there would mean allowing Helen's lies to decide what happened next. A week later, the dealer brought it home. The tires rolled slowly onto the gravel, covering the pale rectangle that had remained beside the bungalow for months. Graham watched from his garden. "Looks right there," he said. "Yes," I replied. "It does, Max." I did not restore everything to the way Margaret had left it. The new curtains stayed. So did the leisure battery, and the 2 matching travel mugs I had bought while imagining journeys with Helen. For a while, I considered throwing them away. Then I decided against it. The caravan now carried happiness, grief, deception, and survival. None of those things had the right to own it entirely. The following spring, we finally traveled to Northumberland. Claire and Daniel came from Birmingham, and Graham joined us in his own car. We parked at a small touring site within sight of Bamberg Castle, where the stone walls rose above the coast, like something that had survived every storm sent against it. The first evening was cold enough to sting my face. Daniel struggled with the awning while Graham offered advice. He had no intention of following himself. Max. Claire made tea inside the Skylark and complained that I had packed enough biscuits for a month. It was ordinary. That was what made it precious. Later, I opened Margaret's travel notebook. Her final unfinished line was still there. Northumberland coast next spring. Beneath it, I wrote, "We came at last." After Claire, Daniel, and Graham returned home, I stayed one more night alone. I sat outside the caravan, with Margaret's enamel mug warming my hands. The sea was hidden beyond the dunes, but I could hear it moving in the darkness. I was not cured. I still missed the money. I still felt a tightening in my chest whenever someone mentioned online dating or romance fraud. Sometimes I remembered Helen's voice before remembering it had been constructed for me. Healing did not arrive as a clean ending. It arrived as smaller choices, answering Claire honestly, allowing Graham to help sleeping without checking my phone, speaking at community centers and retirement groups throughout Shropshire. I never told people they should have known better. I told them how affection becomes routine, how routine becomes dependence, and how shame keeps good people silent. I thought. The worst thing Helen took was my caravan. It was not for a time she took my trust in my own judgment. Getting the Skylark back was luck. Getting that trust back took much longer. As the sun lowered over the Northumberland coast, my phone rang. It was Claire. "Have you eaten?" "I have. Properly." "Properly?" Before ending the call, I looked at the warm light glowing through the Skylark's window. "I'm all right," I told her. "Not the way I was before, but properly all right, Max." Then, I closed Margaret's notebook and listened to the sea. How many people remain silent after being deceived because they fear being called foolish, and how many others could be protected if just one of them found the courage to speak?